Hola.
Hello, everybody. And I'm hearing myself. No music, but I can hear a reverb. Okay, that fixed it. And let's start over. Hello, everybody. This is the Supernatural Substation. You're listening to us on the United Public Radio Network. And if you want to listen to us and talk to us, you can go to Pal Talk. That's www.paltalk.com and look for the United Public Radio chat room. And it's echoing, and I'm sure nobody's out there. Anyway, I'm Eileen Pastanio, and in the wings is my co-host Bernadine LeBlanc.
Hello, hello.
There she is. And we always, as always, Zeke is present. I thought Zeke was going to have to be my co-host because I didn't know where you were. So,
I know I logged on at the last minute.
Yeah, don't do that to me.
Well, I was out of town for 2 days, and I've been like swamped the minute I walked in the house.
Miss Cosmopolitan traveling all over the place. And we don't get to over here. I would look, believe me, I'm ready to head for the hills this week. I won't go into, I just volunteered to be a guest on Joe's political rant show, so I'm not going to bring it in here. But I will say that if you hear me a little stopped up, I've been very upset about what's going on down here in New Orleans. So every now and then I'll think about it and I'll just get a little too choked up, but that's not going to happen tonight. And everybody knows what the situation is. But anyway, later this evening, around 9:30, 10:30 Eastern, we're going to have Nick Redfern back with us. He and I did an interview last year, and it was before Bernadine jumped aboard, and so I wanted to give her access to him because he's one of the great guests, and he's always got a new book, always got something new to talk about. He's fascinating, and there will be no break. Apparently, we're on a marathon, and so you won't get to hear my great music selections for tonight. So anyway, with that in mind. So we are kind of like, we've been this thing together for 30 minutes, and I know we're at 9:10 almost, but we're going to do some topics up front. And tonight, I'm going to ask you, Bernadine, did you get to see that Paranormal Lockdown episode when they came down to the French Quarter to the Zach and Addie house, the murder-suicide?
No, actually, I didn't get to see that, but I did see your post on Facebook, which probably has the whole show in it.
Well, so it's or a description of the whole show.
It sounds pretty bad. Like somebody didn't know what they were talking about.
Well, okay, so they were all lit up about it being the 10-year anniversary. And for people who don't watch it and didn't know, there was a murder here the year after Katrina in 2006 on October 20th, 2006. It was a couple named Zach Bowen and Addie Hall, and they kind of got like famous because they were the only one of like a handful of people. The handful full of people that stayed when Hurricane Katrina hit. So they hung out in the French Quarter in basically almost completely vacant city. And lucky for them, the waters were separating them from Treme and all the projects and all the looting. So they were kind of like isolated in the middle of the French Quarter. And long story. I mean, you can look up the story. Zach was a Marine. He was suffering from PTSD. Addie was a heroin addict off and on, and she was mouthy and not well liked, according to people I know. So let's see. I think it was like maybe 2014 or 13. Anyway, the History Channel contacted me, and it was a story that hadn't been done up to that date. And it's History Channel haunted history episode called "The Katrina Cannibal," because the details of the crime involve cannibalism. Just they suspected that he had killed her, dismembered her, and eaten her body, but he actually had not. So fast forward to I heard about it. I heard that they were coming down to film it um, from somebody. Oh, yeah, Mary Millen, who calls herself Bloody Mary. And so that, I had never. I mean, I don't pay attention to paranormal lockdown. I'm sorry, but I've had, I'm like over the head with all of the IR and the oh, it's a noise and all this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And an interesting thing about that, though, for those who don't know, this apartment where Zach and Addie moved into in 2006, late summer or like just the beginning of October 2006, was above Sister Miriam's voodoo spiritual temple. And during Katrina, again, everybody got out. There, except for like 8 people in the quarter and another group, some little clusters of people that were stuck or decided to stay. And among the people who got out were people like Sister Miriam. Sister Miriam has had multiple altars in her temple. And if you know anything about voodoo, anything about the Loa, they're very hungry and they're very greedy. And they don't do things without you giving them offerings, paying them back in some respect. And that's not saying that it had anything to do with Zach and Addie in that regard. But when you leave an altar like that with spirits that are used basically to being propitiated and paid attention to, and they don't have nobody doing that, and you want to multiply, because we are in New Orleans, and you want to multiply that by like, I don't know, 100 in one spot maybe, and then a bunch more because almost everybody down here has at some point either considered doing voodoo or has done voodoo on something or whatever. So these are hungry spirits, and it didn't have to be Katrina, and it didn't have to be New Orleans. It could have been anywhere, and they weren't fed. And nearby, the French Quarter being vacant, the spirits that prey on people on Bourbon Street and alcoholics and all that, they weren't being fed either. And so,
A city that never sleeps, by the way,
right,
in the French Quarter.
never sleeps. There's always something going on. And Bourbon Street, is open 24/7. And we've talked in the past about how addicts, for whatever addictions, they die, and then, when they're dead, they either die of an overdose or in some way curtailed, and they immediately realize, because the spirit is self-aware in spiritual reality. They immediately realize they're not going to get their hit. They're not going to get their whatever their fix. I'm sorry, yeah, drug lingo. I can't remember. But anyway, when they realize that, they go and they seek people who are doing what they were doing. If it's heroin, they're going to look out for heroin addicts, or they're going to follow them. Drinking, sex, whatever it is. So I heard about the episode, and everybody, who knows whatever the paranormal lockdown setup is, it's Nick Groff, who used to be with Zach Bagans, and Katrina Weidman, who used to be with Ryan Buell. And period. I'll make a full stop there. Anyway, they're paired up, and they go around with all this paranormal lockdown stuff. They get locked down for 72 hours. Earlier last year, I think at the beginning of last year, there was a fire. I think it started on the ground floor, but it wasn't Sister Miriam's fault. And it burned the whole place. Well, it burned her out, and it went up. And so it required major refurbishment and renovations upstairs. So basically what is there now at 826, Rampart, is an empty shell. But the building itself has been there since 1829. And it might still be there if you visit sometime in the future, because, maybe our mayor will tear it down. But anyway, I digress. So here I'm looking, I said, I'm going through the thing, TV, and I'm like, oh, this is that episode. And I'm thinking, do I want to watch this? Okay, because probably something will piss me off. Well, as Bernadine knows. So I'm sitting there, right? And so, they had interviewed me in this thing, and they asked me about possession. And they asked me why. They realize, you realize he's got PTSD. But, and then he dismembered, he killed his girlfriend, had sex with her, kept her around for like 8 days while he chopped her up and tried to cook her. Okay. And in there, he had moments of lucidity, moments that he realized what he was doing. And then there were other gaps of time where he was vacant. And then he would be even more remorseful, realizing what he was doing. So they asked me, could this be possession? And because of Katrina, you can say, well, look what was going on. The city was just covered in a pall of shadow. People called it the Katrina crazy. They called it, whatever, like a form of PTSD or whatever, and the city was going through it. So you put that together, and it can push, an already, I don't want to say decrepit, but already, you know, mentally ill person over the edge. That would happen with anything, that you don't need the supernatural. But with the fact that this city is so supernatural and these kids stayed, yeah, I'm going to look at it and I'm going to say, especially because he snaps out of it frequently. He knew what he was doing. He had $1,500 or something at one point. He was drinking all over the town. And he'd go back and he'd dismember his girlfriend. So the spirits that are preying on people can cause all kind of stuff, and they will jump in and they will attack. So Katrina sits down and says, she doesn't say my name or anything, but knowing that there really is only this one this one episode floating out there that's been seen as far as like Romania, and which I'm very grateful for. She says some people say it's possession. It wasn't that. He was a sick man. So Bernadine, okay. You
Mm-hmm.
know the look on my face right now. Like,
Yeah. I know that what came out of your mouth too, I'm sure.
yeah. And I'm glad I had hit record because, like, a couple of minutes into it, I said, I don't know if I want to watch this right now, so I recorded it. So, later I could go back and be mad again. But I mean, I'm not mad, but I know what they're alluding to,
Right.
because there's only that out there, and there's some articles and stuff, and one that I wrote and everything. And in my opinion, the guy was possessed. He was he was obsessed, oppressed. He already had mental demons that he was fighting. He already had real demons that he was fighting that he picked up in war. Um, he was crazy, and he was borderline. And it took was Hurricane Katrina and the catastrophe that was that he actually saw as a good thing because there were no people around to give him problems. And then
Mm-hmm.
when reality bites and it's back to some semblance of reality, he couldn't handle it mentally. But
The
in that gap,
infestation had already started on him.
right, exactly, because in that gap, they were fed upon, they were preyed, basically. Like, in the episode, I say they were sitting ducks. They were there for the spirits. The place itself, the building itself, not only, I mean, let alone, take aside that Sister Miriam Chamani is down there doing voodoo. And it's a blood house, right? Because she does do chickens and goats and stuff. Just leave that out of there. It's been there since 1829. It's freaking haunted, okay? It's probably built on, or there's probably dead bodies somewhere near because you can't dig like 3 feet in the French Quarter without finding something, a chamber pot, a skull, a bottle,
Right.
because that's just the reality of New Orleans. So for Katrina Weedman to come out there, and I'm not throwing down any kind of a gauntlet because I don't have to come out and say he wasn't possessed because she didn't know any of this information, um, is mistaken. And period. Okay, it's a mistake to do that because a lot of people take these people. They think that they're exemplars of how to do paranormal investigating, how to dress for a paranormal investigation. What do you do if you're in there? What is this toy? What is that toy? And they're in there and they're hearing things talk back to them. Well, of course you're going to hear it. People who lived in the apartments before Katrina, before Zach and Addie even moved in there, said that the apartments, and there's more in the rear, were already haunted. Anything that's been there since 1829 is going to be, it's going to have residual at least, and and it's true. It has active hauntings. And then you have the continual feeding of the spirits that surround it. So wherever there's spiritual pollution, that's going to happen. So I'd like to just say that living above a voodoo spiritual temple was not the best thing for Zachary Bowen, you know,
Right.
period. And then Katrina, and meaning the hurricane and not her. It's just that, the thing I have an issue with is, to say flat out, it's not that, it's this, well, you didn't bother to ask why it was an opinion about that because you don't know, because you don't live in New Orleans, right? And during Hurricane Katrina, I don't even know where you were. You weren't on Paranormal State.
She wasn't here.
Well, yeah, because that was 2005 and 6. She's talking about, and she was not here. And down to the last person you'll ask, everybody will tell you it was just weird. If they say it's just weird and they don't really know any other way to describe it, that's what was going on.
Yeah, that's not to mention in the quarter it didn't flood, okay? But all the surrounding around them, they had dead bodies floating in the water from people that couldn't get out in time for the mandatory evacuation. They also had dead animals everywhere, and they were just floating like, okay, I'm swimming, but I'm dead.
And there were people dying
right
in other ways, not drowning necessarily, but dying over at the New Orleans Convention Center and dying in the Superdome. There were deaths. People couldn't handle it. Dying in Baton Rouge or on buses. It was so full of death and chaos and confusion that, I don't know, let's say, Papa Gede comes in and he wants, he's the one you're feeding for the dead or whatever, and he's hungry and you don't fix his meal, and he's going to be a very upset spirit. Okay. He's going to be a very upset Loa, and he's going to feed on anything that's there.
And also the people, because it was a last minute mandatory evacuation, the anxiety from all these people running here and there and chaos everywhere.
Yeah,
and then
because that great mayor.
Nothing.
Yeah, lights out. That was it. And and even in the History Channel episode, which apparently nobody watched or somebody watched and told them about it, they go through this. They show you what it was like to be with the military, the National Guard when they came into Katrina. I mean, it's weird to see the complete vacancy, the emptiness of the streets of the French Quarter, and always at the rim, at the edge, is this dark, foreboding shadow of discontented, angry spirits who have been, interrupted by this natural force. And don't forget, that's a natural force. So the spirits, they were battling it too, just like the people on the ground. When a force of nature comes in with water and such, they've got to battle that to even stay in place. So when it all came down, you have a guy on a hairpin trigger about to get pushed over the edge. You've got a really, unlikable heroin addict. And it's just, it was just a perfect storm, to not to use a pun. So I would put my opinion and, my reputation down and say, I believe the man was possessed. He was possessed when he did it, when he was doing it. But then, just as I said there while I was being interviewed, he had moments of lucidity, moments of clarity. And he was realizing, is this me doing it? Is it me? And then he would, spray paint things all over this was a pretty grisly scene. And so it comes down to, in the paranormal lockdown episode, they're running around. Remember those microphones that kids used to have and you talk into them and it sounded like whatever, that Geobox or whatever it is? That's what it sounds like. And so they're in there and she was freaking out because of the stove in the kitchen. Okay. Oh, the stove. I was like, stove, yeah. But you see that bathtub? That's where he chopped her up. Okay. That's where he chopped her up. So you want to get this heroin addicted spirit who is pushed over there by murder, pushed and suddenly self-aware on that side by murder, who probably watched him tear her body apart. You're going to go in there and look for it. And then the best had nothing to do with supernatural, okay? Nick Groff decides he's going to go sleep up on the beams of the roof, the unfinished beams. He finds like a catwalk, and he
That's
puts as a
smart.
sleeping bag. Right. Because you know why? Not because I think he'll slip through the thing, but he's damn lucky that the charred and cindered wood didn't just collapse. Okay. 1829 with
Right.
very few changes and refurbishments.
Well, they come down to New Orleans with no clue.
Right. And they, and they weren't given any clue. And then he's walking around saying, I smell smoke. I smell fire. It was like the upstairs. There were the upstairs lounge, if anybody was listening, the fire of 1973. We saw the charred walls that are still there, and so he makes this pronouncement. He says, I smell smoke. I smell. Well, of course you do. You're in a building that just burned out like a few months before you came there. Of course you're going to smell smoke. Okay. It's the, I guess the point in defending myself a little bit, because I am the one that said I believe they were possessed. And there were several people who, weren't on the show, but who, are wise in the ways of voodoo practitioners, et cetera, who agreed that, that would be the right diagnosis, not like spinning heads and pea soup and all this other stuff. Yeah, he was a poor guy that you had sympathy for, but when he did what he was doing, it wasn't him. It was something in him making him do that. And he, trapped in there having to watch it, of course, he jumped off of a hotel to kill himself. So I guess the takeaway on this is don't accept what everybody tells you. Do some investigating that doesn't involve sitting in the dark, get some facts, formulate an opinion of your own. And if you don't understand or you don't agree, then ask the person who said it, you know, um, all their production companies know where I am, where you are, right, Bernadine? So you
Yeah.
could just email me and ask me why I said that, and then you wouldn't look like just a complete, you know, in my opinion, to me anyway, you know, channel up, channel down. This is not
Mm-hmm.
watching this. So, that's what you got. The imitation of these people. Um, it causes more harm than good. And I would respond, but I would ask her, I say, well, what makes you think he wasn't possessed? And why do you know that? I'm talking from an occult perspective. Okay. Why do you think? Yeah, he was all those things. He was sick and left his wife and he had this girl and all this other stuff. And he was a gentle giant because the guy was like almost 7 feet tall. But anybody, even in the best of mind, is hard put to resist a demonic intrusion. So he was a guy who just had no defenses whatsoever and was trying hard not to do what it was compelling him to do. So that's the topic, I guess, for tonight.
Yeah, I think they were just looking at it in the paranormal lens versus paranormal supernatural lens, occult.
Yeah, because even Ethan Brown, who wrote the book, Ethan, I hope it's not Evan. I'm sorry. My mind lately. Hey, I'm old. Okay. Well, the guy who wrote the book, in the Haunted History episode, he says, he said he realized, there seriously is a paranormal element to it. But if he was to think of that in the midst of discovering all the facts to put the book together, he said he'd have just gone over the edge too, because it's too frightening to think about it.
Right.
And if she knew anything, if Nick Groff and Katrina Weedman knew anything, they ought to have known, some of the circumstances that went on and how really grisly it actually was. The girl had, she was petite, but she had hair that was like down to the end of her butt. Okay. So the famous gumbo pot, right? He put her head in a gumbo pot.
Mm-hmm.
And when the police opened it up, all the hair was on top. And, it was just scum, and they had to put on these big vinyl gloves. They pulled the hair out, and the skull fell out of her face. A female officer had to put on Addie's fingertips for them to even get an identity.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Is that Bernadine?
Hey, this is Eileen.
Hey.
Eileen and Bernadine. Hey,
Oh,
Nick.
hey guys. How's it going?
It's
Good.
going fine.
Good.
It's good to have you back. I know it was just you and I the last time, but I have my friend as a co-host, and she wanted to talk to you too. So
All right, cool.
glad to have you, Nick Redfern.
Right.
So since we talked, and I know Bernadine's got a bunch of questions, and I think you don't need an introduction. But since we talked, I think you have what 2 books out? Because it was like maybe 2 years ago or over a year ago that we talked. I know you were working on Women in Black. So why don't you catch us up on what you've been doing?
Well, yeah. Well, I like to stay busy. You know, it keeps me out of trouble sometimes. But yeah, I've worked on a few books in the last sort of 18 months. One being the Women in Black book. Another one called Secret Societies, which is like an A to Z of 200 weird secret societies. And then I've got a new one out right now on the Roswell story, which sort of time-wise ties in with the 70th anniversary, which just comes up in July of this year. So that's sort of what I've been working on in the last year or so.
Well, I always love asking you about the Men in Black stuff. Oh, by the way, we're going to talk straight through because we don't have any breaks because apparently the computer that plays the music for the break or whatever is down. So we don't have any commercials or anything. So we have some time to talk about it. But you were like the guy of the Black-Eyed Children, the Men in Black, and, the phenomena of it. So how has your book been received? It's the Women in Black. I'll start with that. How's that been received?
Well, pretty good. I mean, the whole sort of Men in Black, Women in Black, Black-Eyed Children angle is sort of one of my favorite things to sort of write about and research. And I think it also ties in with things like the Shadow People and what's known as the Hat Man, and even the more recent phenomenon of the Slender Man. They're all kind of part of the same thing. And, when you write sort of a 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 books like on the Men in Black and the Women in Black, as I've done now, you get a lot of people who contact you and say, I read your book and wanted to share my experience. So I get a lot of feedback from people who read those books. And what sort of particularly fascinates me is, a lot of people think the Men in Black mystery in particular is like an old mystery, but probably I get... I probably get, as far as Men in Black and similar reports are concerned, I probably get about 2 or 3 a week, literally. And over the course of a month, probably 1 or 2 of those occurred in the last, sort of 3-4 months. We're talking about, as late as 2017, 2016. So, these phenomena, they're still very much going on. And that's kind of the same with the Women in Black as well. Although it's a lesser known phenomenon, there's no shortage of reports. It's sort of very much an ongoing thing as far as the the Women in Black stories are concerned. And they kind of look, just like the Men in Black. They're sort of really pale-faced, skinny, kind of, people get a weird vibe from them. And, and that's exactly the same with the Men in Black as well. Everything about them is kind of creepy and weird. And funnily enough, a friend of mine did a review of the Women in Black book in England, who grew up not too far from. And he said Nick only wrote the book because all of his early girlfriends were goth chicks, which is actually true, But I really did write it because it was kind of similar to the Men in Black mystery. But I could see how people who knew me when I was like, as a kid and 17, 18, I could see why they would make that connection. And I always say, well, not much has actually changed, really.
You still got it. Well, and you're talking to 2 original proto-goth types that have just aged.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, real goth never dies. It was Alice Cooper who taught me. I mean, everybody kind of thought they discovered it later, but he was like the guy. And by the way, I want to tell you, you owe me a book. You don't.
Sorry, did I forget to mail one?
I sent 2 to you. Oh, I sent the ones that I said I was going to send. I was like, wait, he never sent me. But now that I got you back on the line,
yeah.
say,
If you just follow me a message and with your address, and I'll get it in the mail.
All right, I sure will. Well, I want to bring Dean in because I know she's got a lot of questions for you. So, what you got, Dean?
Well, first off, I've seen the cover of the Women in Black, and she kind of looks similar to your girlfriend or wife. Is it?
I don't have a wife, but I do have a few girlfriends, so I'm not sure which one. It sounds terrible. I'm not sure which one you're talking about.
Oh, okay.
He's a traveling man.
Well,
is one of them?
Aside, joking aside, the Women in Black, as I said, they are kind of like the Men in Black. Now, whenever people think of the Men in Black, they think of Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones, from the movies.
Right.
But a lot of people forget that in the closing stages of that movie, there was actually a woman in black. She was originally working in the coroner's office, and then she gets brought into the program. But the big difference between the movie Men in Black and Women in Black and the real life ones is that in the movies, they're very much portrayed as sort of secret agents of the government. They're sort of like ufological 007s, that kind of thing. But if you speak to the witnesses, I would say a good 96, 97% of the witnesses actually don't describe the Men in Black or the Women in Black as looking like, somebody that stepped out the doors of the NSA or the CIA. For the most part, they're described as very pale, to the point of looking white, like the sheet of paper. And they're sort of very gaunt and sickly looking, and they also have these large eyes that they hide behind these wraparound sunglasses. And as far as the Men in Black are concerned, they wear these old style 40s suits and 40s fedora hats. And the Women in Black are often described as wearing these sort of long wigs, black wigs that kind of cover their entire face so you can barely see them. And so in many respects, the witnesses say that they actually didn't think that the Men in Black or the Women in Black that they met were entirely human. They were something sort of either extraterrestrial or, as many people think, something sort of definitively paranormal.
So do they speak?
Well, they do, but that's kind of a weird thing. A lot of them have this sort of robotic action of talking, kind of almost like a stilted form of talking, as if they're kind of not even sort of self-aware of what they are. It's almost as if they're programmed and they're threatening the people about their UFO encounters not to talk about them. But it's done in sort of like a monotone, robotic fashion.
Kind of sounds like the Black-Eyed Children.
Well, it does, and that's why I think these things are all connected. It's almost, if you've seen the Matrix films, it's almost like the Men in Black, the Women in Black, the Black-Eyed Kids. It's almost like they're a sophisticated computer program, which kind of, prompts the same reactions and responses over and over again, as if they really are, the equivalent of somebody just fires up a program, and they threaten people, they silence them, but they don't seem to know why they're really doing it, as bizarre as it sounds, and they don't come across as entirely as living beings. It really is almost as if, the witness in their home, it's as if they are really plunged into like a Matrix world, like an unreality, if you like, and then suddenly the Men in Black and the Women in Black appear, So I often do think that there may be more to the idea that we are living in kind of a Matrix-type world than most people could think is actually possible,
Kind of like an extraterrestrial drone that they're controlling on their end, to see on our end.
I don't know. It's, things like this have been appearing forever. I know we talked about this too the last time about Nick, about fairy. and before that, the encounters with this, what they call the demonic reality, these spirits that are always here, and they're really kind of neutral until they encounter, whatever person they're encountering, and then their reaction is based on, how we react to them. And recently, in the last week or so, I don't know if you've seen it, but I think Huff Paranormal posted it, I'm not sure, but there's somebody who set up like a trap on their porch because somebody was seeing black-eyed kids in the neighborhood.
That.
Did you see that?
Yeah.
And if you saw it, because there's like they were hoping, it took like 5 or 6 nights, and then what showed up was a girl, what appeared to be a girl though, in a hoodie, and none of the smaller kids, so I'm getting that they can, they can appear however they want to, and just, kind of fit themselves to our perception. I don't know if I'm explaining it right. Is it something like they tap into us, and obviously they're tapping into fear, but, like if I was to see one, it might look like, Queen Elizabeth or something, it's like, that's because that's my mindset, or it might look like, I don't know, Machiavelli, but, other people, it's all, this high tech stuff. So, but that was a pretty creepy video. And,
yeah, no, you're right. It actually is. You're right. And I think the important thing is that, this has happened on a number of occasions where people claim to have photographed or filmed or recorded these creatures, and they've not turned up. A good example is a friend of mine, Denise Stoner, who lives in Florida, and Denise had a couple of weird MIB and Women in Black encounters, and where actually, they had sort of security cameras outside and nothing was picked up. And I had a phone call and also an email message from a guy who'd heard me on one of the radio shows talking about the Men in Black. This is going back to about August or September last year, living down by Del Rio near the Mexico-Texas border. And he'd had an experience where he had sort of, like burglar alarm, motion cameras outside. And he saw these creepy-looking, skinny Men in Black outside. And actually the cameras were triggered. But when he played them back, there was nothing on the footage. It was just, as if there was nobody there. It was just regular footage of the front yard, And I think something, like a possum ran across, that was the weirdest thing of all. Nothing else, which is the kind of thing you would expect at like 3 a.m. or something. But
and the possum's like, what? I do this every day at 3 a.m. It's like, why is that camera on? But a weird thing about that latest one was that the guy who set it up and then was describing it, he had like set some static up. It was like somehow there was this theory that whenever the people encounter the black-eyed kids or the men or women in black, there's a staticky feel, like you're buzzing kind of. And so he had some kind of a loop on a static program that he was luring, or he was trying to use to lure these black-eyed kids to him. Do you know anything about that? They talk in regular language, but...
Well, they do. They do, but it's kind of, it's like the Men in Black. It's almost like programmed. Whereas the Men in Black are programmed to threaten people and silence them, the black-eyed children are sort of programmed to try and find a way into the house. They say, we're lost, or, we're homeless. Can we come and have some food? Or can we come in and phone our parents? With the Men in Black, with the black-eyed children, it's always about trying to find a way into the house. And what's interesting is that they never force their way in. They always try and find a way to be invited in. And that kind of ties in with the old vampire legends from centuries ago about how the vampires of Eastern Europe would have to try and find a way to be invited in. They couldn't just march in. And what's one of the most disturbing aspects of the Men in Black, Women in Black, and black-eyed children phenomena, which again demonstrates they're not from the government or anything like that, is I've got a lot of very disturbing stories where people were in very close proximity to these entities, and within days they'd fallen sick with very bizarre and rare illnesses and diseases, almost as if they'd been kind of like supernaturally infected somehow. And there's actually a lot of stories like that which go down sort of like really ominous paths, you know.
Oh, wow. Well, yeah. I guess is there any inoculation for that virus? I don't know. I don't know.
Not. Well, the only inoculation is just don't let them in, you know. But
and take a drink.
Yeah. But I mean, joking aside, you know, most people, when I tell these stories, people will say, well, there's no way if I had heard a knock on the door at midnight and I looked through the spy hole and there's these creepy, skinny guys in white, there's no way I'd let them in. But most people do let them in, and it's almost like their mind has been enslaved or controlled to kind of convince or force the people to invite them inside. So in other words, it's like there's a degree of mind control going on, you know, to try and get in the house or to threaten the people.
Dean, you got something?
Maybe that the buzzing around them, you know, that staticky feel may have something to do with the illness that the people get.
Well, it could be, you know, I mean, you know, we don't know. I mean, you know, things like radiation, which, you know, we can't see, but, you know, it's like if there's an atomic bomb goes off and you're in the vicinity and you're not, you know, you're not sort of hidden away inside or in a cellar or something like that, you know, before you know it, 2 or 3 days after, you've got severe radiation poisoning and within a week you're dead. But you can't see radiation, you can't smell it, you know, you can't... but it's there, you know, if an atomic bomb goes off, God forbid it happens, but, you know. So, in other words, there are, you know, examples in the real world as how things that you can't see, touch, feel, smell, but can cause, you know, significant damage or even health, even, you know, death to you, you know, in terms of being in proximity to it.
Wow. I do have a question about shapeshifters. I've seen a show, I can't remember which one, but it was about this guy. He was an archaeologist, and he actually had an artifact that would shapeshift. Well, he purchased it in Peru, and it was used in ceremonial magic, taken from a grave. And it was willed to a friend of his because he actually stated that in his spirit form, he stated to his friend that that's why he died, because of that object. Now, they tried to find the object because he came to her in a dream. So he couldn't tell her what it looked like because it would shapeshift. But he knew what it looked like when he purchased it. So
that sounds like Brad Steiger wrote something about that. I'm sorry, go on, Dean. I didn't mean to interrupt.
It was, I guess, a true story because it was on one of the paranormal shows for I guess witnesses, and she and her son had to try to find it, because all kinds of crazy things were happening to them and in the home. Well, they actually had to have a psychic come in and speak to the deceased spirit, you know, the spirit of the man, to draw, and she drew it out for them. But since it would shapeshift, it was hard for them to find it. Well, in the end, they did find it, and they had to do some kind of ritual to get rid of it. But I was wondering if it was something like the Dybbuk box. Have you heard of the Dybbuk box? Where they do some kind of magic to where there's a spirit that guards that box.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I wonder if the shape-shifting, if it's an object.
Do you have any stories like that? That, you know, in your shapeshifters books of like you know, that something goes and attaches to an inanimate object, either to keep from being, you know, discovered or sent away or something, you know, like that.
Yeah, I mean, I've actually got a book coming out in September on shapeshifters, and through Llewellyn Books, and it's got the stunningly original title of Shapeshifters.
Okay.
I'm actually looking at the cover right now.
Yeah, and but there are a lot of weird stories concerning, when people think of shapeshifters, I think most people who are particularly not into the paranormal, the first thing they think of is, werewolves from, because of the movies and so on. But you can find tales of shapeshifters throughout all manner of cultures and societies and mythology, folklore and legends. In the book, I've got a couple of chapters on werewolves, but also chapters on things like the Native American legends of skinwalkers, which can reportedly shapeshift, and things like in Africa, you have these leopard cults where there was a belief that the shamans of the tribes could transform into leopards and other big cats and things like that. But there's actually a number of really interesting cases relative to shapeshifters that revolve around artifacts. I mean, one of the stories that I have in the book concerns what are known as the Hexham Heads. And what happened was in the early 1970s in the north of England, there's this little ancient town which goes back about 1,000 years called Hexham, and two young boys dug up these stone heads, and they looked like, one looked like a male face, one looked like a female face, and it turned out that they were sort of fashioned about 3,000 or 4,000 years ago by early primitive people in the UK. We're talking, not cavemen, we're not talking that far back, but we're talking about sort of early primitive tribes in the UK. And they would create these heads basically as like paying homage to, back then, they worshipped like earth gods. And so the idea was they would create these heads paying homage to the earth gods to try and ensure like a bountiful amount of food for the next year and so on. But these two young boys in this little town of Hexham in the north of England in 1972, when they dug up these old heads from deep below in their backyard, and then they were subsequently shown to be thousands of years old. When they were taken into the family home, both in the family home and the next door neighbours, and then also a well-known historian who handled the heads as well, they all experienced strange phenomena where they would wake up in the middle of the night, semi-paralyzed, and they would see this sort of human-like figure looming over them, but he had like a wolf-type head, almost like a classic werewolf. And this was, as I said, the kids, the families, and even an expert in ancient British archaeology who held on to the heads for a while. Even her house was kind of haunted, as if to say that there was something about these carved heads which had sort of a supernatural aspect to them, and that wherever they were taken, these sort of humanoid, half-human, half-wolf creatures would manifest in whatever house or building that the heads were taken to.
Wild. That is wild. That it's making me think of Dion Fortune's book, Psychic Self-Defense.
Oh, yeah.
And she talks about in the part about inanimate objects and stuff, where she describes herself as she was staying with a friend, and she lived upstairs, or they had a house together in England, and the friend had found this little Buddha statue, just a simple Buddha, like you see a happy, smiling Buddha or whatever. And actually they were using it as a doorstop, but it lived like in a turn of the stairs, like, when the door was closed. And one day Dion was coming in and she had some flowers, and she had, she picked one out and just threw one at it. And after that, whatever was in it, it's like it activated it, or something. It was like, here's an offering. And so she, it's tough to do, I guess, to freak her out. She was kind of freaked out with it because the energy was coming after her. And like at night, it was making itself known. So I guess like the bottom line is, if you don't know what it is and you don't know where it came from, and if it's heavy and expensive, leave it alone if it looks, but it's so weird because you never know what you're going to, what somebody has used something for, so, I mean, that's the antique thing in me. Is like, I'll only take old stuff from my family, that, that pretty much I know the history of. But just going and buying some really antique, you just get those vibes off of it. It's like, what was it used for? I don't know, but I don't want it in my house. You know what I mean?
Well, you do find that, whether it's artifacts, statues, buildings, people often get weird vibes for reasons that they don't really understand. They walk into a house they've never been into before, and there's just instantly, people just get this odd vibe and they don't like it. Or, it's an artifact like the so-called Hexham heads from 1972. Everybody who hung on to them for a while just got a weird vibe. It's kind of like, you see these movies where there's like a haunted kid's doll, and everybody finds dolls kind of creepy,
Yeah.
And it's kind of like that with a lot of these phenomena where people experience this sense of malevolence and weirdness and just this eerie vibe, but they don't really know why. But you get that a lot in paranormal activity where someone walks into a room or picks something up and there's just something they don't understand, but it's just not right. And but you get a lot of that in shapeshifter cases. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, I have one other, Dean. I have one other question about shape shifting, or we can continue to talk. It's just Matt. Have you seen? Because I'd like your opinion on this, and I know I didn't ask you. Have you seen the video clips of the night walkers, allegedly filmed on a security camera, and they look like clowns or whatever? They look like they're walking on stilts. And they're white. Have you seen that? It's got the little head and they look like they have like sheets or whatever, but it's not registering as a human and it's marching like down a hill. There's one. What the hell is that?
Yeah,
that scares me.
Weird.
Like, I don't even like looking at it, years later or whenever it was filmed on YouTube. Okay. It's just like, that creeps me out.
Yeah. Well, that's sort of a perfect example. I mean, I'll be honest, it could be real, it could be a fake. If it's a fake, it's like a really well done one. But what I would say is that everybody who's looked at that says exactly what you said, that it's not just strange, it's like there's something kind of unsettling about it, something disturbing about it.
Yeah, just the idea of this, And I already have this phobia of like remote cams. Dean will tell you that. I don't like looking at it's just something. It's not voyeurism. It's like, I don't like it.
Yeah.
But this has creeped me out. And I think there are some fakes out there, but that's the original one. And it creeped me the hell out. Like you're out at 2 a.m. and this thing comes walking down a hill.
No, that's right. And I mean, people, that kind of time of the morning as well, between sort of 1 and 3 a.m. is when, or actually it's more between 2 and 4 a.m. is when you get more paranormal activity than any other time in the home, because I think that's when people are in their deepest sleep state, and so you're most vulnerable to being sort of psychically attached. There's a lot of evidence that a lot of these paranormal entities can actually kind of invade our dream states and actually become part of our dreams and even manipulate the dreams, So that period of time, in terms of the hours, is very much, associated with the paranormal. Now, I will admit there's no doubt that some people have posted stuff to YouTube which looks really good and turns out not to be so good after all in terms of validity. But then on the other hand, you can't sort of dismiss everything just because something may have been hoaxed or faked. And, there are classic cases like that and other ones and a few Men in Black YouTube pieces of footage that, I think do stand up. So I think it's important in today's world, with advanced technology and digital manipulation, we should take every kind of case on its own merit, rather than jump up and down and, wow, this is great. We need to sort of step back and take a breath and just look at it for what it might be,
It's true because, I don't scare easy. Now, I'm not bragging, but like if I go see a horror movie and it's not, there are a few that have actually scared me in my seat, like, the exorcism scene from The Conjuring, the first one. That, the exorcism scene from Deliver Us from Evil. But if it gets me, like, I'm upset, and that particular thing with that thing walking down, it's just, that is like a primal. I think that's what gets overridden with the black-eyed kids. Like, it cancels out your fight or flight, and for some reason it makes you're just lost in this moment where you're receptive to letting these things in, and I guess that's it, and that could be that could be the end of your life. I mean, I guess people who have let them in and then nobody knows, like, they're gone.
Yeah.
Well,
your compassion overrides your gut feeling.
Right.
Yeah. But
not
no,
today.
right. There's
not
a lot
today.
of weird stuff where people just get this, like I said, this odd vibe, or they don't know how to deal with it. And as I said, we don't know. Maybe with some of the black-eyed children reports, maybe people have answered the doors, but we don't know what happened. Maybe, worst case scenario, they died, but they would never live to tell the story. So maybe all the ones that have told the story are actually the ones who haven't let them in. The ones who let them in, maybe, who knows what happened to them. So there's a lot of issues to be raised. But I mean, when you're talking about movies, I mean, you're right. There are sort of certain movies that I think really do capture people's imagination from an unsettling way. Kind of like, The Exorcist. I mean, I was only a little kid when The Exorcist came out, so I didn't really see it until, the 80s or something like that. But when I saw it, it was a disturbing movie. I think anything that kind of, for some weird reason, I think when you're dealing with things like exorcisms and demonic possession and things like that, people really do kind of resonate with that, but they're not sure why. It is like really, everybody kind of finds that sort of disturbing, as if we have some sort of, almost like a collective inherited memory of, demonic possession in the, distant past or whatever.
Yeah, my mother took me to see that when I was 12. We were standing in line, and these people, and New Orleans is a big Catholic town, right? And she had her rosary, and my Aunt Marlene was with her, and she had a Bible, and I didn't know what I was. They had a nurse on duty if people were passing out, and it was freaky. And then she held her hands over my face, like, for several of the scenes. So I didn't get to see those either until like the 1980s. But now I look at it, and it's not. You're just like, oh my God, because CGI is so good. But I will tell you this, the thing that frightens me in there is when he records it, when Karras records the demon talking, and the other guy says, well, it is a language, but it's backwards. That's creepy. That right there is, and the fact that there were so many things going on, like paranormal occurrences on the set and everything. So, but, I don't know. I guess got a different mom. And then she's like, oh, and it's never mind. I said, yeah, Mom, I might be possessed, now. I'm only 12, like the girl in the movie. But anyway, you go on, Dean. I know you have some questions.
Well, my mom also took me to see that at 11.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a Louisiana thing,
It's a Louisiana thing, yeah, and our crazy families. But yeah.
Sorry, my dog is barking in the back.
Right.
I said my dog is barking. If you hear it, I apologize.
Right. It's all right. We can have another host. It's okay.
No problem. I'm sorry, Dean. I interrupted you. What were you saying?
I wanted to ask you about another book, and Eileen's gonna play a little thing for you right now. The zombie book, because we have Zeke the zombie.
Well, it's called How to Speak Zombie. So what's your question?
Do you have Zeke right now?
Yeah, I have Zeke right now. It's a book.
I wanted him to hear Zeke.
Oh, okay. At the office, right? That's about right. When I work, that's what. It's this really cool book. I'll have to take a picture of it. It's called How to Speak Zombie. And it has this little thing that you press the numbers, and it goes on like that. So he's kind of like our other co-host. And, if he never abandons me, it'll be me and Zeke interviewing you, looking for brains. So what do you feel about zombies? Okay, I think that's where we're going with the question.
That was my question about his book, the zombie book, and how does he feel? How does it fit into the supernatural?
Okay. Well, yeah, I wrote a book with Brad Steiger about, excuse me, about 4 or 5 years ago called The Zombie Book. And it was like an A to Z book of 200 entries on everything to do with zombies. And, because people have read the book or have seen the book and, asked me what my thoughts are. Now, the two very different angles when it comes to zombies. Now, in the distant past, and certainly up to like the 40s, 50s, zombies were essentially sort of people who were mind controlled and acted in sort of like a zombie slave-like fashion, either through hypnosis or they would be given these sort of mind-altering cocktails to drink. And, they would work in the fields in places like Haiti and places like that. It was all tied in with voodoo. And, as I said, sort of mind control. But then in the sort of 60s and 70s, it really changed, particularly with George Romero's Night in the Living Dead, where instead of sort of the stumbling zombies of Haiti and places like that, it turned into where, zombies were the dead who came back to life as a result of viruses and biological experiments, the military unleashing these deadly viruses that changed everybody. And, and then, of course, today we've got extremely popular things like, The Walking Dead and movies like 28 Days Later and, where they're either stumbling but very dangerous or, high fast runners like, 28 Days Later or World War Z. So there's two distinct differences in the terms of what a zombie is. Now, there's one of the sort of bizarre aspects of all this is that, research has been done, into creating sort of deadly viruses that could, plunge people into the closest comparison to a real zombie. I mean, the closest thing that there is to sort of the zombie virus today would be the rabies virus. If somebody gets bitten by a rabid animal and they don't have treatment, they get, well, actually, it stays dormant for a while in them, and then they start to have sort of seizures and, they exhibit evidence of sort of psychological problems. They develop anger and rage states, and in the final stages, they have to be literally strapped down in hospital beds for everybody's sake, for everybody's safety. That's the closest thing. And there have been weird conspiratorial rumors of sort of labs and government-sponsored agencies trying to sort of refine the ultimate zombie virus, where it could be unleashed on the battlefield, if you like, and have the enemy troops turn on each other, as bizarre as it might sound. But when you look at something like rabies, if that could be sort of synthesized and refined into like a biological weapon, that would be the closest thing possible to something like the zombie virus. So, but I don't think, we all have to sort of worry too much about, learning how to shoot people in the head and,
or stabbing them in the brain. Okay.
Yeah, we're not quite at that stage, but joking aside, there's, a lot of research has been undertaken into how viruses work. And the one sort of saving grace in all this is that there actually isn't any kind of virus on the planet that has ever affected a person that kind of kicks in within seconds or minutes. It's always, at the very least, sort of 10, 12 hours or days, or sometimes weeks. And with the rabies virus, it can actually be months before the symptoms start to set in. But, it's like in, World War Z particularly, and 28 Days Later, you get bitten, and within like 10 seconds you're shaking, and then you've changed, Fortunately for us, there is that situation doesn't happen. But, who knows what could be around the corner, who knows what we might find.
You've segued into conspiracy theories and secret societies, which is also one of your recent books. And so there's a whole lot of, we had a guy named Isaac Weishaupt on, and it's not his real name, but he's called the Illuminati Watcher. And he focuses on like these false flags and symbols in popular culture, etc. So it's so weird. The whole thing is so like outrageous that it's like you want to say, this can't be real. Nobody can do this. But then you stop to think about it, that, it's been explained to me, like, there's really only a small group of people that are controlling all this stuff, and then you begin to get the paranoia, and they talk about the Mandela effect. I mean, is that all in your book? I mean, what's your approach to that? Because
yeah, I mean, actually the Secret Society book was published by Visible Ink Press that did the zombie book, and all their books are kind of the same style. They're sort of A to Z books with 200 entries. So I've done about 4 or 5 in that style for them, like the Monster book, the Bigfoot book, the Zombie book, and the Secret Society book. And but yeah, I mean, there's when it comes to secret societies, there are a lot of perceptions, but also misperceptions, in some cases at least, as to what they are. Now, there's no doubt that some secret societies throughout history, have sort of held sway. Over, and have tried to sort of mold and manipulate society around to their belief systems. And that, the most obvious example, you hear stories of like the Illuminati, created back in the 1700s, which was a legitimate secret society. And then now, though, there are rumors that the Illuminati have sort of infiltrated the worlds of government and banking and powerful figures, and that although the Illuminati as a group may not be sort of controlling the planet or holding sway over these organizations, they have people in place who do it for them. So, you have that angle. And then also you have some very intriguing secret societies. They're very disturbing and have bizarre rituals, but they're very much localized. In other words, they're not sort of trying to take over the planet. They're just trying to look for influence and power for themselves at a localized level. I mean, a good example of this bizarre nature is that one of the things I talk about in the book is a dragon worshipping cult that surfaced in the late 1960s at, of all places, at Loch Ness, Scotland. And this revolved around a secret society or a secret cult that the local police actually started to investigate when they heard the rumors. And what was going on was that there was this powerful, very deeply hidden group of people in Scotland who were in the worlds of politics, big business, and local government in Scotland. And they set up this, what was basically like a dragon worship cult. And they would worship this ancient Babylonian sea goddess named Tiamat. And the whole idea was to essentially try and invoke this Babylonian snake goddess and have her bestow on them sort of power, money, influence, sex, etc. All the things that most secret societies look for. And there were dark rumors that to invoke Tiamat required a sacrificial person. In other words, the rumor was they were killing people in sacrificial rites, and that's why the police got involved. Now, that aspect of the story was not ever proved, but the group vanished very quickly. But there's no doubt that this cult existed for sort of 7 or 8 months in and around the shores of Loch Ness, performing these sort of midnight rituals in the woods surrounding Loch Ness to try and summon up this ancient sea goddess as a means, as I said, for power and influence and money, etc. So there's a lot of weird secret societies and cults, and sometimes they're so powerful they do begin to get into the world of government. Things like the Bohemian Club, Bohemian Grove, where you have this bizarre secret group that perform all these sort of weird rituals, but most of the members are people within government. So you have this blending of secret society crossing over with government agencies and people within government, where the two blend together.
What what about, you've segued me again. That's great. I don't know if it's in there because it may have been too recent. I don't know exactly, but what do you think about this whole Pizzagate thing?
What, sorry?
Pizzagate, what they're calling Pizzagate.
Oh,
And
well,
this,
you know,
the
I mean,
spirit cooking. And you see, when
yeah.
I'll just tell you from my point of view, it
Mm.
sounded like a load of, horse, whatever, it sounded like,
Well, I'm
wait,
glad you
I
said
was
that.
just like, well, it did, but then I heard about this woman, Marina Abramovitz, okay? And I looked at the rituals that she was doing with the so-called spirit cooking and the things that she was doing. And I was like, wait a minute. That's when I recognized these are real rituals. She is a Thelemic high priestess in the Crowley tradition. And she's actually doing something occult here. And that's when I said, whoa, okay, if that, that's like a red flag to me. If somebody's involved doing that, then these really outrageous things we're hearing are probably true. Because, there's this woman. So, what do you think? I don't know. Did you get it into your book, or?
No,
I don't know.
actually didn't. I didn't include that in there because, I looked, the publisher sort of gave me not just a lot of leeway, but they basically said, at your discretion, use whichever 200 stories you want to use. And I actually didn't use Pizzagate because although I knew of it, there was a lot of stuff that was controversial and unprovable and, unnamed, or it was one source and nobody else. And, it doesn't mean there's nothing to it, but things like that where it's a one source person or it's very controversial, it's friend of a friend tales, I just decided not to go with it, not just because of those angles, but also because it was a very controversial and unsettling area, and I felt personally that, the responsibility was on me as the author to go with what I figured was provable, not go with stuff that was really unsettling and disturbing. But in saying that, if you look at the stories, you're right, that when you look into what's being said, I do fully understand why the subject has a deep following in terms of people who research it. But, I kind of go with certain criteria, in terms of what I'm looking for to try and vindicate it before I write about it. And I have certain criteria that if it matches this, if it matches up to this or that, then I'll perhaps go with it. If it's like really controversial, and unsettling and disturbing,
I think,
I'll leave it out,
The one thing is like, you just don't want to get killed. It's like,
well, I am actually worried about that as such, but I mean,
but you don't want to be, you just don't want to be caught holding the pen at that point, because it's such a rabbit hole. But and it is controversial. It's connected with politics and all sorts of weird stuff. And in some things, it's like we're kind of better not knowing some things because our minds just couldn't handle it. But
I'm quite happy going down the rabbit hole as far as it goes. I'm not sort of like a weak-minded person who sort of backs away at the last minute. If I'm investigating something, I'll take it as far as I can.
Oh, yeah.
But in saying that, if I feel that there's something that is a disturbing and kind of story that makes people almost feel sort of unclean kind of thing, and the evidence may not be as strong as some people think, a lot of friend of a friend stuff, I prefer to leave it out until a point turns up where there's more information or it dies off, because mainly because also that there's so many other ones to go with that are sort of far more vindicated or supported, rather than going with something that's maybe a little bit less supported.
Right. Dean, I'm going to throw it to you now.
And we are so happy that you do your research.
Absolutely. And that you're still alive and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, people often ask me that, do I feel worried or concerned? I honestly don't, because, my view has always been, if you're going to investigate something like, I don't know, like a UFO conspiracy, a crashed UFO or Area 51 or Men in Black or something along those lines, I always have tried, when I first finished school, I worked on a music and fashion magazine in England called Zero, and they taught me all sort of background, into journalism and how to structure a story and interviews and pull the reader into the story, that kind of thing. So my view has always been to follow that investigative journalism approach. And to me, if you're investigating something, you're getting really close, the worst thing you can do is back away from it because, you're getting too close. For me, I don't get that. I mean, for me, I push and push until I get as much information as I can. And, the Men in Black haven't knocked on the door yet. And, there's been no sort
Knock on wood.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's been no 3 a.m. phone calls, from some creepy voice warning me, what could happen if I continue with what I'm doing. But I think if that did happen, really, it would just spur me on to investigate it more. If somebody starts to threaten you, you're actually on the right path. So.
Right, exactly.
Well, just so you don't answer the door for the black-eyed kids, because we haven't had a story yet from someone who has actually entered the door.
No, I won't. Don't worry.
That we know of,
Yeah.
That we know. So what was, I'm sorry, Dean, am I walking on you? Did you have something?
Oh, no.
Oh, I was
going
to say of the conspiracies and stuff that you researched, it's, I don't want to say favorite, but what was the most, I guess your favorite and the most compelling one that you worked on, that you came across?
Well, I mean, there's sort of, risk of repeating myself. I mean, I would have to say the Men in Black mystery. And when I say the Men in Black mystery, I mean collectively the Men in Black, the Women in Black, Black-Eyed Children, the Shadow People, the Hat Man, the Slender Man. They're all kind of aspects of one phenomenon. They're all typically turn up in black clothes, and certainly for the men, it's always like a black suit, a white shirt, a skinny black tie, and usually a black fedora hat. And with the women, it's like one of these long black wigs in kind of like a Bangs type style and a black outfit. And there's always these paranormal components. They turn up late at night. They have mind control abilities. They kind of look sickly and dead in some cases, And because there are so many bizarre stories, that really paranormal and supernatural based, and they also pop up in relation to Bigfoot sightings and strange creatures. And I've got a lot of reports where the Men in Black and the Women in Black turned up after people were using Ouija boards, things like this. So for me, that collective angle of these sort of shadowy, black-dressed figures, that's probably my favorite thing to research and write about, because it's so fascinating. There's so many angles and so many different theories for what they may actually be, So, I mean, I know people would get bored, but I could happily sort of just write nothing but books on that subject for the next 30 years, But I couldn't do it. I've got to break it up a little bit,
Brad Steiger had a good one. I think it was in Strange Encounters, and it was a story of these out of time, out of place, out of time looking people. And it was someone who wrote in. I think it was they had an experience of like, it was the 1990s or whatever, and they stopped in this town or wherever. His wife was getting gas, and he went over to the drugstore, to get some cigarettes, and when he walked in on something going on between these three people and the clerk. Like, it was just like this, they were looking at each other, that feeling like you really interrupted something, but nobody looked at him. And he looked, he was thinking, oh my God, I don't want to, so he went around, went to go get in line, and he looked at these people, and they all looked like they had walked right out of a 1940s movie. Not in black, but they were like in, the Joan Crawford type of the big, the big shoulder pads, the hat, even the luggage they were carrying. And then it was like the guy, behind the counter was in a trance the whole time, and no words were exchanged. And then they just turned and they like walked, lockstep out of the place. I mean, what do you think about that? There's a lot of stories about just totally out of place individuals,
like time travel type stuff.
Yeah, like.
Well, that is actually one of the interesting theories about the Men in Black and these associated phenomena. What if they are actually time travelers. I mean, if you look at the Men in Black particularly, you know, their suits and the skinny ties and the black fedoras, they kind of look like they've sort of stepped out of like a 1950s black and white gangster movie, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
you see these like old movies where, you know, there's this guy in a suit and a fedora and walking down a foggy street in New York with his gun.
Right.
You know, they
Right,
kind of
exactly.
like
It's such a caricature. It's like,
yeah.
you know.
And so one of the theories is, well, what if they actually are time travelers? You know, the theory is, actually a friend of mine, Josh Warren, dug into this quite deeply. The idea that the Men in Black, you know, if, let's say, hypothetically, they are from thousands of years in the future, well, let's say that, hypothetically again, something's happened to our civilization in those intervening 3, 4, 5,000 years, and there's not much, you know, perhaps we've destroyed ourselves, and there's not much left of our civilization, and perhaps the people of 10, 15,000 years from now, when society or civilization is building itself up again, they've just got a few remnants of images of the people who came before them, which would be us. Maybe they just got a few crumpled pages from old magazines from the 50s. And if they've achieved time travel, maybe they've looked at these old magazines and see how we dressed, and they kind of mimic, not realizing how quickly our fashions actually change. You know, I mean, you can go back to, you could go back to the 1980s and just see how quickly our fashions have changed. You know, you watch something like,
God.
you know, you went back, you know, it's kind of like if you went back and watched an episode now of like Miami Vice, you know, where the cops are wearing like pink T-shirts and white jackets with the sleeves rolled up, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's just like a few decades ago. But maybe with the Men in Black, if they are time travelers, they're just not aware of how quickly fashions change, and they think they're blending in when they're actually not. And so, you know, the time travel theory is an interesting one, the idea that, you know, we're actually living in the past rather than the present, you know, and the future's the present, you know.
Yeah, now you're starting to get where I have to know math or something. I was feeling like I remember somebody trying to teach me about that. But linear time is what it was. It was something to do with Einstein and stuff like that. But I'm not good at math. But
yeah, it's kind of like one of those. It's like one of those horrible things, you know, where you get at school where they say, you know, if a train travels 40 miles at 15 miles an hour, you know, in the rain, and the rain stops, you know, it's like, what? You know, do we really need to learn this? You know? We're never going to use it up when we've left school, so let's just forget about it.
What is the airspeed velocity of an unladen sparrow?
Yeah, exactly.
A European sparrow or an African sparrow.
Yeah, I don't know that. No,
yeah.
it's kind of like you're never going to use things like that when you've left school, so let's just not even bother learning.
That's not true. That's not true. I will tell you a little story. I will tell you, and it's my brother. God, I would say it in front of him too. We stayed there for a little while, and it was too many cars, you know, and everybody's car was black too. It was like the Men in Black, except for my sister-in-law, but she's not in the story. And we were trying to figure out how to park, you know, on an angle to allow him, you know, and his son to get out. And he's like, okay. And, you know, and he gets out a can of this fluorescent paint, and he literally sprays lines, you know. He's like, okay, you're going to pull in like this. And I said, you know, do I have to do geometry every time I pull in your driveway? What if I park over there and my daughter, parks over here? You know, this is your spot. People are like that. He took calculus and all that other stuff, you know, and he's like, that's what it makes of you. You know, you're like this OCD, you know, don't park on that angle. You know, it's like, God, do I have to solve, you know, the Pythagorean whatever to park my car? You know, I'm a liberal arts student, and you starting out in journalism, I know you are too. It's like, you know, yeah, the more liberal arts, the better, because I hate math. And that's probably why nothing like a Man in Black has ever found me or whatever, you know, because it's like, if it involves numbers. But since we're talking about science, some things have happened in between the last time you and I talked. And because I was looking into the Illuminati Watcher Guide, I've been looking at all this stuff about CERN and about dark matter. And in the intervening months, they've talked about, you know, seeing these, they had to call them entities because they did not know what they were. basically clustered in the magnetic sphere, the Earth's magnetic sphere, over military bases and major urban centers and stuff. And whatever it is comprised of something that they have heretofore never encountered. And the way that these things act, again, while they're observed, see, I do know a little physics, a little bit, is, they react as living things would act. And so they're influenced by observation as well. But, it was like, it kind of just passed under the bridge there. And I wanted to go, excuse me, but science just kind of said, that there are entities on another plane of existence and they can see them with telescopes. Have you heard of that? I mean, I'm sure there's some theory and there's all this, but basically that's the bones of it. I don't know if you heard of that yet.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I don't know if this is sort of directly connected to that or not, but I mean, so I've got to be honest, at least the last 15, 16 months, I've got more and more reports of people seeing kind of like dark-colored entities, shadow entities, invading their homes, but particularly invading their sort of their dream state, where they've had really graphic dreams, which didn't seem like dreams. Actually did seem as if some sort of paranormal thing entered their dreams and manipulated it. It's kind of like the Matrix movies, in I think the first one where one of the characters said, if you had a really vivid dream, how would you know it was a dream unless you waked up? If you woke up, you wouldn't. And so, but I get a lot of really weird stuff lately from people who have seen sort of what you would call like trans-dimensional entities entering our reality, providing messages, sometimes threatening messages, but other times sort of helpful messages or warning them to be prepared to do something in the future. And I'm actually getting more and more of these stories from people, and they're sort of having these extremely bizarre and vivid dreams, and they wake up the next day and there's like a strange odor in the bedroom. Or they've got weird scratch marks on their skin, as if the dream state has crossed over into reality, sort of like a Matrix. And I sometimes wonder, if other dimensional realms are kind of something like the Matrix, sort of like a reality that's an unreality at the same time.
Yeah, and I think it was like when I read about that, and I was like, and they kind of basically they say we're gonna call on entities, we don't have another name. I was like, bingo, okay, that's occultism right there. And that I knew it already. I sound like a complete idiot, but no, I mean I knew it from proving axioms and proving that these things did exist. They're objectively real entities, from demons all the way to fairies and everything else, in the way we perceive them. But I'm kind of creeped out by the fact that there are dark angel-like beings observing us, and that their activity is so much more amplified now. A lot of people say it's CERN and what they're doing over there. I also know that drifting around out there is the Enochian magic of John Dee. And while there are scientists in white coats and all this other stuff talking about Einstein and, park like this and all, there's other people out here that are working those keys, and they think it's a good idea to get these angels into our reality. When it's not, it's really the apocalypse, and it's the key to the apocalypse. So, I mean, have you ever written about that, or, had any opinions about that in the flip-flop of it?
I did write a book in 2010 called Final Events, and this dealt with a very strange story. I uncovered a group within the government, which was like a think tank type group, that came to believe that the UFO phenomenon is not extraterrestrial, but is literally demonic. That was their conclusion, their belief. They believe that what we're seeing with the UFOs is like a demonic deception. And they came to believe that, as the UFO phenomenon is sort of getting bigger and bigger and, more visible, that it's kind of like it's going to culminate in like a battle between good and evil, and that what we perceive are, the kind of slightly evil-looking grey aliens, and then you have people who see these long-haired aliens that look more human. They came to believe that it was kind of like a classic parallel to, demons and angels, and like fairies and goblins, that kind of thing. And it was a very, very weird and disturbing story. This group deeply hidden in the government and being secretly funded to investigate their beliefs that, the whole thing had this supernatural, demonic aspect to it. And they did believe that, it's all kind of leading up to some sort of, face-to-face confrontation, the ultimate battle between, supernatural good and supernatural bad. Whether you view that as, God and the devil, or you take, a different view that it's different dimensions, creatures in different dimensions fighting, or, another religious persuasion or whatever. But it basically came down to that kind of scenario. So, there are a lot of weird things like that, going on, and in terms of beliefs as to what's around the corner in the future for us.
I mean, you got people saying, "Oh, if it's angels, it must be good." And stuff. No, it's not. It's like, I mean, I run around like a school marm, going, "No, don't touch that, don't do that." I want to just do it to the whole world, because Crowley was working, and I know what you're saying about that book. What is that book? I want to read that book. What is that book you mentioned? Your book?
Final Events.
Final Events. You see that simple thing just left.
It's been out a while now. It's sort of been out 7 years. But yeah, when you
just
mentioned Crowley, when you just mentioned Crowley, I mean, Crowley was someone who, was heavily involved in all sorts of, kind of rituals and rites, to summon up supernatural entities, and he very often sort of involved, the requirement of, being in an altered state, whether chemically or due to, sort of trance meditation, that kind of thing.
I mean, sex. You use sex a lot.
Well, it's like sex. I mean, sex magic is, is a perfect example of, of ritualistic magic. I mean, it's like a key component of it, because sort of sexual energy in many cults and supernatural research is perceived as like an energy which can be fed on or utilized. Right. And that's why you have these stories of ancient stories of things like the incubus and succubus, where these things would turn up and manifest in people's bedrooms, and it would be like a supernatural sexual experience, but the people the next day would feel sort of wiped out. Not because they'd had a really good time,
right? But that's something.
But because they were literally zapped of their energy. They were sort of, drained of energy. But Crowley was someone who, like a lot of people, he recognized that if you were to perform these rituals and rites, you could achieve a great deal. But if you crossed the line and messed with the wrong ones, you could be in big trouble. I mean, an example, when he conjured up back in 1918, this entity known as LAM, L-A-M. If you see Crowley's own drawing of LAM online, it looks like a classic modern-day alien,
Yeah.
And yet it didn't land in a UFO. He invoked it by getting himself into this deeply altered state and performing these ongoing rituals for a long time, and then finally LAM manifested.
Yeah, and Jack Parsons too was busy with that too. In fact, and I know we talked about Jack previously, but his wife, or his Babylon, Marjorie Cameron, she wrote a letter. She saw a silver ship, which Crowley was telling everybody to look for, a year before the what is the watershed of the first report from, I think it's Kenneth Grant or whatever.
Yeah.
She actually saw it a year ahead, and she wrote to Crowley saying, I saw it, and so that was his way of knowing magic was working, because Jack Parsons was doing Enochian magic, and a lot of what Crowley did, other than inventing the religion of Thelema, but he worked Enochian keys. He was kind of obsessed with that magic, which everybody should be kind of concerned about, really. It's a system that really scares me.
Jack Parsons was also one of the formative rocket pioneers in the United States, and I mean he actually had a top secret clearance with the U.S. Army, Navy, and Air Force in the 40s to develop new rocket programs, and the military brought him on board because they knew how brilliant he was in that field. And he actually has a crater named after him on the surface of the moon. He went on to, establish the Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena. And he also set up the lodge, so to speak, of Crowley's organization in Pasadena too. But the military, they realized how, advanced he was and how important he was to the rocket program. So they kind of turned a blind eye to the fact that, he was performing rituals to summon up, thousands of years old demons and gods, etc. And they, there's actually there, some of the files, the surveillance files that have been released on him now, where the military are frowning because they were trying to contact him on one particular occasion. It turned out he was having like a wild orgy, and that they said, well, we need to find him. We've got to get this rocket in the air, and so it's kind of like this bizarre, almost surreal situation of the military realizing how important the rocket program was, but also being willing to essentially bring people on board to create and fly these rockets who essentially were perceived by them as sort of occult magicians,
Right. And Crowley, Jack kind of scared Crowley over there. He was in England getting these letters from people, and he was just tripping out saying, what are they trying to do? Him and Hubbard, L. Ron Hubbard, what are they trying to do? They're trying to bring the homunculus into the world and, bring the age, the Eon of Force and all that. And that's like a side comment on Scientology, it's like, I'm going to make up this religion and everybody's going to follow it. And, and they did. Tom Cruise did.
There was a while, when Parsons and Hubbard were good friends with each other, but then they fell out, over a girl, as sometimes happens, and, and then...
Hubbard stole his girlfriend.
Yeah, exactly. And what happened was that Parsons sort of continued with his rocketry and his paranormal research. Hubbard went on to create Dianetics and then Scientology. And then often happens when people get involved in trying to invoke these things, it ends up in disaster, and that's what happened for Parsons. He blew himself up in his lab in Pasadena in '52, and just about made it to the hospital before he died. And so it's almost like one of those, like a Faustian pact. It all went well for a while, but there's always a price to pay in these situations.
Absolutely, because what they're dealing with are real entities.
So I always say, don't do it, kids.
Yeah. Don't do it, especially if you don't know it. Dean.
Well, that's the important thing.
Especially don't know what you're doing. Don't do it. Really. Lives have been lost to that kind of stuff. Dean, I'm going to pitch it to you.
How much time do we have left?
It's 10:42 my time. So that's what? Probably about another 10 minutes or so before Joe starts counting us out.
Oh, okay. I have a question. You have two books out, if I'm not mistaken. One is called The Men in Black, and the other one is called The Real Men in Black. Can you tell me the difference between those two?
Yeah, it does get a bit confusing. I've actually done, on those subjects altogether, I've done 4 actually, and another one's coming soon. The first one I did on The Men in Black was called On the Trail of the Saucer Spies. And then the second one was The Real Men in Black, and the third one, Men in Black, and then I did Women in Black. Now, the difference between The Real Men in Black and Men in Black, The Real Men in Black is basically a study of case files going back to sort of the 40s onwards. That's the sort of the first part of the book, so the 40s to the present day. And then the second part of that book, same book, is looking at the theories for who or what the Men in Black might be, sort of tulpas, time travelers, aliens, paranormal, demonic. It covers all those areas. Now, so that's The Real Men in Black. But the Men in Black book, which came out 2 years ago, that is basically, that book's written a bit different. Over the years, I've got a lot of Men in Black stories, and a lot of people have sort of very generously allowed me to use them. So that book is filled with sort of about 30 chapters of first-hand reports from people who'd had their own encounters with the Men in Black or who had their theories for what they were. So what I did with that book, it's basically each chapter is an account from a person, you know, in their own words, and I introduced them and who they were and how I got to know them and what the story basically is. So I kind of, each chapter is like a lead-in from me, and then the person tells their own story. So the real Men in Black was me talking about the history and the theories in my own words, and the Men in Black was me introducing these 30 people whose, you know, the sort of best MIB stories I've got, and introducing them to the reader, so to speak.
Okay. And I have another question. Can you explain a little bit about what the Monster Files is about?
Well, yeah, that's a book that I did about 3 or 4 years ago with New Page Books. And that book deals with government files on strange creatures like Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster. And, you know, everybody kind of knows that, you know, through the Freedom of Information Act, various government agencies have released UFO files over the years. A lot of people don't realize that government agencies have also put together files on strange creatures. For example, the British Royal Air Force in the 1960s, which is the equivalent of the US Air Force, they used their sort of photographic experts to analyze film footage and photographs allegedly showing strange creatures in Loch Ness. And they actually concluded that some of the footage that they analyzed did seem to show a large animate living creature surfacing and part of it moving under the water as well. So that, you know, that's in the UK. Now, in the US, a friend of mine, Stan Gordon, he, in early 1973, was looking into a spate of Bigfoot activity in Pennsylvania. And Stan found that a number of people who'd seen Bigfoot in Pennsylvania in that period had been secretly visited afterwards by representatives from the US Air Force asking questions all about these creatures, where it seemed like the Air Force had concluded that these Bigfoot creatures were sort of supernatural and were clandestinely approaching the witnesses to try and get information as to what these creatures might be. And also, in the 1950s, you know, you have in the Himalayas, you have the Tibetan equivalent of Bigfoot, which is the abominable snowman or the Yeti. And I also got files through the Freedom of Information Act on the Yeti, talking about how the American embassy in Tibet actually laid down guidelines that, you know, if somebody was to see a Yeti, you know, if you shoot and kill one of these things, you can be prosecuted for killing what is essentially an endangered species. So in other words, the Monster Files is sort of a study of government records and government documents on weird creatures, everything from lake monsters, Bigfoot, the Chupacabra, all sorts of weird things.
Well, have you seen that new show? I think it just started a couple of months ago, and it's called Killing Bigfoot.
I saw one of them, yeah, but I mean, I kind of thought it came across more like a gimmicky kind of thing, you know. And
No.
They really sit in they sit in an auditorium and argue about this stuff. I mean, we can't even find Bigfoot, and they're going to sit there and make a big thing of it.
Yeah, I mean, to me, you know, if you consider it entertainment, then it was entertaining. I kind of turned off after about 30 minutes or so. I was just like, well, this is just, you know, this is just entertainment for people who, you know, just want to be entertained. You know, that it's not actually a show dedicated to actual on-site investigations into Bigfoot. You know, it was like the equivalent of, you know, a reality show about, you know, like The Bachelor or whatever. You know?
I never watched the show. I seen the previews of it because I wouldn't want to see anybody kill Bigfoot. But
or a man. There was. I remember the commercial.
Or a man dressed in a costume
and there was
like
a guy
Bigfoot.
saying, "You don't understand. It's a human being you're going to be trying to kill." And what he meant was somebody's out there, you know, fooling you idiots because he's running around in a gorilla suit. But, you know, we don't need them because we have the mountain monster guys on Destination. Have you seen that show? I don't know what's going on with that. Like,
well, again, I saw one or two. But the problem I have with a lot of paranormal TV today is that it's gone from being documentary style to crossing over into sort of like reality TV, you know, where the line's blurred between what's actually real and what is reality TV, you know, recreated scenes and things like this. And so I don't really have much time for those kind of shows, really.
Yeah,
I'd sooner...
I mostly see the commercials.
I'd sooner vacuum the carpet, you know what I mean?
Oh, come on. Look at the Mountain Monster guys. The reason it catches my attention is like, you know, we went after Bigfoot. You know, they originally started looking for Bigfoot, and then they started looking for other sort of crypto, you know, monsters that were reported now. And now I don't know if they just wanted to stay on TV or, you know, they're just very agreeable to whatever. They're involved in this thing like, oh, we found the woman of the woods and now we're after this. And it's like, you can't take this seriously. It totally looks scripted and they're trying to make it, you know, not scripted.
That's the problem I have. You know, when I say it's kind of turned into, you know, a lot of these shows have become sort of reality TV. And, you know, the depressing thing is a lot of people today don't really care about, you know, they just like to be entertained by reality TV. But for me, that's sort of it's almost like a dangerous dumbing down of the population if everything just becomes a blur between you're not sure what's real and what isn't. But it's okay, it's all entertainment. Well, no, you know, there's actually still a good, solid place in the world for real investigations, you know, where you don't need to sort of create stuff or embellish stuff. There is enough weird stuff where you can really tell a good story, you know.
Absolutely. Right. And the commercial, you need to look for it, Nick, really, because it says the woman of the woods, and they show this woman, and I swear she's got like a house coat on and she's got deer form slippers on. You need to look at that thing because she's like, she takes off and it's like she's in
updated.
these bedroom slippers. All she didn't have in her hair, I mean, all she was missing was the curlers, you know.
She was coming from Walmart.
Or going to. I was like, what is going on with these guys, you know? And then you got the other ones that build all these traps and I mean, you know, they're catching things in these traps that they're making up. And oh my God, you know, every time they say Tesla coil, I'm like, yeah, you know, maybe it'll arc off, you know, and kill off all these people. But anyway, we're coming up against the end of the show. And I want to suggest something to you that I'd love to see you, I'd love to hear you talk about, but I'd like to see. I'm sure you're aware of the Elisa Lam death in the Hotel Cecil and all that, and how big the story is. So you've heard of it, right?
Yeah.
I'd like to see you do something on that. Really, I really would.
Well, I mean, there's certain things I'm interested in, and some that, you know, I sort of leave to people who are, you know, experts in that area. My kind of areas are sort of specifically kind of UFO related or cryptozoology related. You know what I mean? They're the kind of areas that really kind of, you know.
Well, you know, there's theories. I know you've there's a guy named it's Lord and Arts now on YouTube, and he really did some really in-depth investigation about it. But there's these theories about invisible cloaking devices that were being researched on, and they said, you know, they were talking about they were here, and then they had the TB test that came out after they found her in the cistern, and it was called Lam Elisa. It's got the conspiracy. And it's got the supernatural because there really is in the footage, and then it's got the whole cover-up type thing, you know. And I mean, you do such in depth. Well,
you never know. I mean, it could happen. I mean, I'm always on the lookout for sort of. I don't like to go over old ground, even though I've done sort of 4 books on the Men in Black. You know, they're all very different because it's just filled with different stories. But you know, I always try and go for different subjects, you know, where I can. I mean, I've got a new book. The next book, I've got a book coming out in February of next year, which is a study of the whole Slender Man mystery.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad to hear that.
I mean, it sort of deals with the whole idea, you know, although it started off as a kind of like an internet meme, people then started to see it. So it kind of the book sort of delves into these areas where, you know, can the human imagination actually create something which then externalizes and becomes kind of like a real thing in the real world, you know. So
yeah, that's the principle of magic. That's the principle of manifestation.
Yeah, like things
magic.
like tulpas and thought forms, that kind of thing. You
know? Yeah, and it's in that whole group. But yeah, that story on her is it's not as straightforward and upfront as it seems, you know, and it's a whole.
Okay. Oh, look into that.
Seriously, look into it, and you know, you could. I mean, there's tons of stuff, but if you really want to see a guy who actually went through the facts, it's Lorden, Lorden Arts on YouTube, and he has like a whole playlist of it because he literally went there. They took it apart. It's no BS. You know, he really did compare, and there were things that stumped him. So I'd like to see you take that one on. And the Dyatlov Pass thing, you know, the guys that froze to death.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's an interesting story, but there are actually already 2 books out on that, and I think
you're right.
Yeah,
but
I think
if you could give a new spin.
Yeah, I mean, there's certain subjects which I haven't written books about, but I wouldn't because the people who know far more about them than me. I mean, to give you a good example, I'm really interested in the black-eyed children phenomenon, but a good friend of mine, David Weatherly, who just lives not far from me at all, David sort of wrote what I think is like the definitive book on the black-eyed kids, and for me to sort of do my own book would really just be like copying almost, which I don't want to do, you know.
Yeah. We had him on not that long ago.
Yeah, I'd rather do, you know, something else than kind of just copy what David did, because that would, number one, it'd look disrespectful, and also it probably wouldn't add anything new to what David's written anyway, so there'd be no point me doing it. So I always try and come up, you know, with something that hasn't really been done before and that people will hopefully find new and interesting, you know.
Well, great. I know we're up against the end of the show, and yeah, do look into the Lisa stuff. And I'm gonna message you so that I can remind you about the book and everything. But thanks so much for joining us here and being a trooper, because we had no breaks tonight. It's so interesting. You're one of the best out there. It's not, and you're not just, you know, sci-fi and all that. And I like that because your mind's open to other stuff. So I hope one day you'll come back again and you'll have more books.
Just let me know, and just let me know when you want me on, and you know, I'll be happy to come back. So.
And why don't you? You've got a website, right? Where I guess we'll just give out the web address, and anyone who wants to find your schedule and events, it should be on there, right?
Yeah, I've got a blog. It's called World of Whatever. So you could either type in Nick Redfern World of Whatever in a search engine, but the address is Nick Redfern 14, FORTEAN, Nick Redfern 14. .blogspot.com, and I usually update that most days, and people can find me on Twitter, Nick Redfern UFO, or find me on Facebook. There's about 5 or 6 Nick Redferns, but scroll down and you'll find me. And I'm always happy to chat with people, and you know, if people got questions, you know, if I can answer them, I'll be happy to do that. So.
Excellent. Well, thanks again for being here. I'm glad Dean finally got to talk to you and everything. And you have a great weekend, and we will stay in touch with you.
All right, that sounds great. Thanks
Definitely.
a lot.
Thanks, Nick. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Well, we're up against the end of it. Well, you know, you can look for Bernadine at the LSPR Society. You can look for me at linksustanio.net, and we'll be back next week. And I think it's our last of the month, right, Dean? So we'll be back, and we'll be covering all these topics. So have a great weekend out there. Watch out for unexplained phenomena, and say good night, Dean.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
The Skittles are loose.
Oh man, no break.